Welcome to this presentation on creating successful DDG proposals. We're so glad that you clicked on this slide presentation and that you're interested in applying for a DDG. Let me introduce my colleagues today. So I'm Marianne Christensen, and I've been on the TIRF board for quite some time. I have the pleasure of serving as co-chair of the Research Advisory Committee. And I am joined today by my colleague, Anna Krulatz. She is in Norway right now, and I'm in Utah. And she also serves as co-chair of the Research Advisory Committee. And our Chief Operating Officer, Ryan Damerow, is here with us today, and he'll be speaking with you a little later in this presentation. So we're just going to jump right in. First of all, let us tell you that the purpose of our presentation today is twofold. We want to introduce you to this application process because it's very important that you submit your application properly. But as we're doing this, we also hope that we can advance your understanding of why we're asking for this information, because these are important components in any research proposal. So this is what the cover sheet in section 1 looks like initially. So we're starting you off with very easy things, I think. These are all things that you can answer very easily. One of the things that you need to make sure that you pay a little more attention to, however, is section 1B. And so let me just talk to you about this. So like all foundations that fund anything, and this one particularly because we fund research, we get our funding from certain places. And so we have a partnership with the British Council. So some of you may be eligible for funding from the British Council, as well as from our other partner, Cambridge English. And so you would benefit from understanding where you fit with eligibility for the British Council funding. So there's a link here that is active, and you can click on that and just see if the country that you're planning to do research in, or the country that you are from, makes you eligible for the British Council funding. 1C is also a little tricky. Maybe some of you don't realize that you have to have complete your application in enough time so that your research supervisor has sufficient time to read it and give you feedback. And then 1D is about how your institution where you're getting your doctoral degree does its ethics approval. And you need to make sure that you have ethics approval before you apply for the doctoral dissertation grant. So that's all of section 1. But we have put this little page in here in our slideshow just to remind you of these 3 facts that you're going to have to work a little harder on than that first section. British Council eligibility, your supervisors, that your supervisor has read the application, and that you've received ethics approval from your university. So let's look at section 2. I will say that section 2 is so difficult to write, I think. And one of the things you might do is just leave this section until you have everything else completed, and then come back and add your 200 and 250 word project summary. It's like writing an abstract. You know, often when we write papers, we do our abstract at the end. So it is a little bit tricky, but let me tell you the pieces of this project summary that need to be there. So let's look at this. So there's a statement of what the research issue is, or like the problem is. And you have to be really super clear on that. A statement explaining why resolving that issue is important, not only for you and what you want to do, but for the field in general, how it creates new knowledge. And then a description of how the research will be carried out, and an explanation of how you plan to carry out, how your plan will resolve the issue or contribute to resolving the issue. So I'm going to now turn the time over to my colleague, Anna Krulotz, who is going to talk to you about section 3.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening to this presentation. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about section 3 of the application, the detailed proposal. And this is the part where you will probably invest the most of your time in the application because it is the biggest part of it. So there are first just some general guidelines. The detailed proposal shouldn't exceed 6 pages. And you have the guidelines here regarding the size of the font and the spacing. So it has to be single-spaced, 12-point Times Roman font. There are some headings that we want you to use in your application. And these are statement of research issue, theoretical background, research methodology, implications, timetable, plans for dissemination, and research ethics, which links to what Maren Christensen just talked about, what you have to also put in the first part of the proposal. And then finally, you also have to include a list of references, and these have to be in APA, and I'll talk about it in more detail on the next slides. So once again, here are the main components of the detailed proposal, and we will now take a closer look at each of them. So first comes the statement of the research issue or problem. And here is where you have to show how your project is actually related to one of the current TIRF research topics. And here you have a whole list. So you can select 1 or 2 of these and explain very specifically how your project falls within the scope of this topic. And so you also need to think about your research questions and ensure that they are clearly related to the topic and that they're specific and measurable. In the background, just like in any research proposal or in any research paper, you are going to discuss current literature. So you're going to demonstrate that you're familiar with other recent research. Note how we underline recent. So in some cases, it may be relevant to go back to older publications, seminal publications on the topic that you have selected. However, you have to show the familiarity with the most recent research findings. Also, we want to point out that it's important for you to not just list the previous studies, but rather find common themes and synthesize rather than just summarize. This is not easy to do, and it takes some practice, and this is where you may want to ask your supervisor for some guidance. You also need to define central concepts, especially if there are many different definitions of the central concepts that you're defining in the field. And finally, it's absolutely crucial that you identify a gap in the research. So you have to show how your own project is going to contribute and bring something new into the field. And you need to be very, very explicit about it. So state very clearly and explicitly where your project contributes, how it is novel. And if you want some extra help, we've pasted this link from National University Library here for you. It has some nice tutorials that can explain to you how to identify a research gap for your project. Then the next section is research methods. So here you will include information on your research design, on the participants, the context of your study, your data collection procedures, as well as your data analysis. So be sure to provide a detailed account of how your data are going to be collected and how you're going to analyze them. Also, explain why you have selected these particular methods, and also be sure that the methods you have selected actually allow you to collect data that will answer your research questions. And then if appropriate, use a multi-method research design. TIRF very much encourages multi-method projects. In the implications section, you need to clearly express implications for, in particular, policymakers. So in what way is your project or the outcome of your projects going to contribute to our knowledge and then changes in the field of English language education? So what is your project going to bring in to contribute to positive changes and to affect decisions that are made by policymakers? So again, this needs to be articulated very, very clearly and specifically. You're also going to include a timetable for your research. And in the timetable, you have to show very clear and distinct benchmarks. So by when you're going to accomplish certain goals. So for example, data collection will be completed by such and such date. Data analysis will be undertaken in this period of time, and it will be completed by this date. And then also please remember that grants can be awarded to projects that can actually be completed in 1 year. So you need to be in the final stages of your PhD program, and the amount of time left on the project, including data analysis and writing up your dissertation, should not exceed 1 year from when you get the grant. And then additionally, you're going to present plans for dissemination, because we want you to tell the world about what you found in your project. So in addition to publishing your dissertation, well, some of you may be publishing a monograph, others may be publishing dissertation by articles, which is the format that's becoming more and more popular in certain parts of the world. But of course, we want you to disseminate your findings via as many venues as possible, because you're contributing something important to the field of English language education, and we want you to tell people about it. So of course, we encourage you to select standard means of dissemination, such as academic journals, peer-reviewed journals, or in books that assemble book chapters, so edited volumes. This should also include, you should consider, if possible, open access publications, both local, national, and international venues, and that also includes conferences, but also consider disseminating your work via electronic media. And so your plan on which of the venues you're going to try to reach should be included in your proposal. And also remember that if you do get the grant, you need to acknowledge TIRF in all forms of dissemination. But that's something to worry about after the results are announced and if you have received the grant. So this is not something you have to put in your application. And then let's also talk about research ethics and then references. So this is something that has already been mentioned briefly. Make sure, this is just a reminder, make sure that your research has been approved by whatever entity governs the approval of ethical research at your university or in your country. And so in the proposal, you need to provide a short explanation of how you're going to uphold the principles of research ethics. You have to indicate that you actually have obtained an approval, for instance, IRB. And then there are some guidelines for you to consult here in case you have questions about how to do this. Most countries and most universities today do have very specific guidelines, so we encourage you to consult those. But if you're in doubt, you can also look at informed consent guidelines that are published by the TESOL quarterly at the end of each of the issues. And then finally, what I'd like to talk to you about is APA 7th edition. So these are the guidelines you're going to follow for your in-text citations and the list of references. So it is very important that you follow this in detail. The reason for this is that in the academic world, we all have to follow certain conventions. APA is just one of the styles, but the point of this exercise is to get used to being very rigorous in how you cite previous research. So it is very strict, it is very conventionalized, but as a part of your academic career, you'll have to learn how to do that. So if you do not have access to a hard copy at your university, there are several guidelines online, several websites that provide guidelines, and this is one of them that we highly recommend. We find it very useful and also very straightforward to follow. And now I'm going to turn the presentation back over to my colleague, Maren Christensen.
So let's talk a little bit about the budget. This may be the first budget that you have ever put together. And so it comprises a part of the application that may be a bit challenging for you. So you need to understand that you can just have 2 pages maximum. So you really need to think about this carefully. Include the itemized expenses related directly to your research, because one thing to remember is that TIRF is a research foundation, and so we are interested in funding research. And so when you put this together, look at the allowable budget items. We are interested in funding almost anything related directly to your research. You also need to state whether you've had other research funding. And these sections, these 2 pages, don't count towards the total pages that are allowable for your research proposal. So that may come as a relief, because some of you, when you get into this, your research proposals hit right up to the maximum pages. So one of the things that we do, there is a list of fundable items under TIRF's guidelines, so that will help you. We will fund research up to $5,000. If you put a budget together and it's more than $5,000 and you end up receiving a grant, you will not get more than $5,000. We fund up to $5,000. But one of the things that we do that other research foundations do not do is that we allow $2,000 of your budget to be for dissemination, to help you disseminate your research, to go to conferences, so travel expenses, or to pay conference registration fees, or your accommodation. So that is something that we are so happy to do, because we encourage young scholars to disseminate their research. Some things that you need to pay attention to are the non-fundable items. That would be tuition, moving if you had to, insurance, childcare. None of that is fundable, primarily because it doesn't relate directly to your research. It's not actually funding the research. So that may be an easy way to think about it. You also, we do not routinely reimburse for expenses that were incurred before you received the grant. So do think about that piece. I'm now going to turn the time back to my colleague, Anna Krulats, and she is going to talk to you just a little bit about your curriculum vitae.
Okay, so just a few words on the last section of the application, and that is your CV. Please note that you have a maximum of 2 pages, and also that you need to include your CV in the proposal form rather than sending it as a separate attachment. Do not send it as a separate attachment, send it all together. The 2-page limit for this section, however, does not count toward the page limit for the detailed proposal. So you do have some extra pages here. But just a few words on how to write an effective academic CV, because it's a little bit different from a typical CV that you would be submitting to an employer, for instance, outside of academia. Obviously, a good academic CV has to show your skills and professional achievements, but in addition to information about your previous work experience, for example, and your university degrees, your academic qualifications, it should contain information about research that you may have done, about any publications that you may have already or any funding that you have already received. And so all of these items will strengthen your publication, your application. So even if it's contributions to conference proceedings or participation in conferences, your early career scholars, but all of these little things definitely count towards your application. So don't be shy about including your academic achievements. Here are some additional resources that we thought you may find relevant, resources on how to write an effective academic CV. There are 2 websites here. And then in addition, we also wanted to suggest one more resource, a book titled Research Methods in Education that may help you with other parts of the proposal, so your literature review and your research methodology. And this book is actually available online for free. So even if you cannot access it through your university library, this is a free online resource that you can access. Thank you. This is all we wanted to say about the application itself. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Brian, for some final additional information.
Thank you so much, Anna and Mary Ann. We really appreciate you offering some guidance to the potential DDG applicants, and to all of you out there who are watching this video. We certainly encourage you to apply. And here we have a QR code and a link. This link, along with the other links mentioned in this PowerPoint presentation, will be placed along with the recording on our website and on our YouTube channel. So don't worry, you don't have to manually type all of these links in. Those are just a preview for you. So going back to this, you could easily take out your phone right now if you're watching this on YouTube and scan the QR code and go to our DDG landing page. On that page, you're going to find a lot of the same information that you have just heard in this presentation. That is the different application sections, the application itself, the link to the area where you submit your proposal. And perhaps one of the most useful resources that you'll come across is a greater discussion on the frequently asked questions that people tend to ask year over year about the DDG application process. You're going to find things like issues that relate to eligibility. There's more of a discussion on the budget and grant payments. There's an application process section, and then sometimes individuals ask questions that have to do with their supervisors. So be sure to take a look at that section in particular. And then in general, on the TIRF landing page, as we're wrapping up here, you're also going to find some other useful information that's not necessarily related to the doctoral dissertation grants program, but we've got a lot of great publications, many of which are free to download. We have our annual latest prize competition for research on language planning and policy and educational contexts, and tons of free resources for students, for teachers, for all kinds of individuals in our field. So we encourage you to visit us online and learn more, not just about the DDG program, but about the other programmatic offerings that we have as well. So it's been a delight to talk with you all today. And once again, many thanks to Anna and Mary Ann for leading this presentation. And we hope that you will be filling out an application soon. If you have questions, write to us. I am your main point of contact at TIRF, so it'll be me who you're communicating with. So thank you once again.